Welcome to your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education that will give you the versatile skill set to adapt to a changing job market. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I am Anika Madden, and I'm a parent. It is Thursday, January 31st, and welcome to episode number 53. More schools are no longer requiring standardized testing. In this week's news, as students return to college, a basic question persists. What are they learning? And we're in chapter 53 of 171 answers, and it's all about why an increasing number of schools are not requiring standardized tests these days. And this week's question is from a mom who wants to know how her child can know that the major she selects is going to lead to a job she will love and be good at. And Mark continues his interview with Elaine Griffin Rubin in part 2 of the 9 different federal loan repayment options.
So, Anika, I was going back and listening to some of our episodes, and one of them you were talking about how you're having this family meeting with Naya and you're going over everything, and you're talking about how it's like Naya and Michael and we're all there. And then other times when you talk about Naya and Javon. So can you clear up the records? Because I don't want people to think you're a bigamist.
So my family, first of all, and don't let me digress, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you. So Javon came up with this grand idea, who my husband, Michael Javon Madden, his family was all named by J's, okay? So he had this bright idea that we would name all our kids by J's, and I wasn't totally for it, but we put a J in every name. So Christopher Jalen Madden, Janaea Nicole Madden, John
with
Andrew
Elaine Griffin
Madden.
Rubin.
They all don't necessarily synchronize with the first names, but they all have J's in it. So that's my ta-da. Did that answer your question?
Well, no, what answered my question is that Michael and Javon are the same person. I didn't want people thinking that you got some man on the side. So I'm glad you clarified that Michael and Javon are the same person. So we're good. We're good.
One and the same. And I'm sure he would have came in and clarified himself if need be.
Yes. Listen, Anika, before we transition, as you know, we've shattered our record for our most downloads in this last week. And one of the reasons why I think is because multiple people reached out and said that they have been sharing our podcast on social media. So we want to ask a favor of all of you out there who enjoy the show. Can you please share our show on social media? We'd be most grateful.
And it's not about us. It's about you. It's about the relevance and how people need this information. It is critical and vital. So thank you for all of that have done it.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, Mark, in this week's news, as students return to college, a basic question persists. What are they learning? And this is found in the Hechinger report. Am I saying that right?
No, Hechinger. Like, what the heck?
Report.
Like, what the heck?
Okay. Hechinger report by Jon Marcus, pretty recently in the fall of 2018. And so what is known publicly about what and whether college students learn is mixed. And so, Mark, measuring learning in college and reporting the results is surprisingly hard to do. Translating these results in a way that lay people can understand is even harder. So colleges are saying that the public should trust them to make sure that their students learn the right things, and which to some people means that lets them off the hook, which guess what? Anika Madden totally agrees with. And they say what they're saying is that what we do is just far too complicated. And the kinds of outcomes that we produce in higher education may take years to understand. Again, Anika Madden agrees with this. And let me just digress a little bit, Mark, into my own personal issues here, because Jalen, Janae, and John, my 3 children, all, the first 2 went through KIP, the KIP program, the National Charter Program. John, now we moved to North Carolina. He's in a totally different system. And at some point, I just had to let it go with the teacher, with the system. Y'all got it. I trust everything that you're doing. And I'll fast forward when I went to Jalen's freshman orientation at school, and I sat in that auditorium with a bunch of other parents, freshman parents, and I asked the question. I said, "Listen, I'm a first time parent of a kid who's going through college. What in the heck should I be doing? Because I've been this PTA mom, I've been doing all this crap, I've been contacting teachers and all this stuff." And one of the guys that were up on the panel, he said, "Listen, don't email me. No, don't do that. And I got this." Basically, is what he was saying. So all that to say is that what he was telling me, Mark, was to totally turn it over to this adult child, number one, that I've produced. They're adults now. They're 18. Well, most of them are 18 years old. And you've entrusted your child and yourself into this institution that you know that we've done this for years and we've got this. And when I tell you I relinquished all of that on that day, Mark, to like you wouldn't even understand, like I did. And I didn't go beyond that. And Jalen has done extremely well. And you know, and he's about to graduate in May. And and I can't even tell you how well you know, Mark, how well he's done. But I let it go. And I trusted what they were doing. And essentially what this article is saying is that, hey, guys, listen, Margaret Spelling's former Secretary of Education was calling for all these reports, and we got to know what the kids are learning and producing all this stuff. I personally, as a parent, don't agree with that. Like, you know, at some point you got to trust the professionals. Like, that's what they're there for. They went to school for all of this, and they've trained for all of this. And at some point you got to let go, and I did. And as I was reading through this article, I was just like, whoa, like it took me to a serious flashback of, wow, why do I need to go through this? Like, these people are here for a reason. And at some point you've got to let all this go and trust that these people know what they're doing and that these kids are learning what they need to learn. And that's why you chose this institution, whatever institution you're at, to take care of all of this. Am I wrong or am I right? Or am I in between? Tell me, please.
Well, I will say that I'll say you're in between, but I will say that, you know, we haven't had a good knockdown, drag out disagreement in a while, and we might on this one. So, so I think it's been a like good 20, 30 episodes. So this is what the article is saying in essence is, how do we know our kids are learning when we send them off to college? Like, what metrics are being used? I mean, is it just blind trust, or is there any way of actually verifying and validating that true learning is occurring? Here's a quote in the article. It says, "There's a push that's coming now from policymakers and consumers who want to know the return on their investment in college. We're starting to see a lot more interest in this area from governors and legislators," says Robert Anderson, president of the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association. "We've never really had to demonstrate our learning before," said McCormick. "It's on the agenda now. I think it's because of the escalating cost." So let's kind of go some of the history in the last 20 years. Attempts to measure learning, which for the most part have failed. So NESE report came out in 2000. And I remember when NESE came out, and we were so excited. Here's this new way to actually track the way students are spending time in college, including how much they actually study, and are they meeting with the faculty, and are they participating in class discussions, and what level of engagement is occurring. But now, fully 18 years after the launch, only half of the 630 institutions that participated in NESE are sharing their results. So that's the first thing. Then what you mentioned, the Federal Spellings Commission on the Future of Higher Education. This was convened in 2006 to take a look at learning. And in response, the two principal associations of public universities launched the Voluntary System of Accountability, oftentimes just referred to as VSA. This invited colleges to administer standardized tests and then to publish the results. But 12 years later, when you look at VSA, it's basically just become an internal document that institutions use, but they don't really make the results public. Then another attempt. You have the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Their member nations agreed in Athens to develop a worldwide measure of learning that they called the Assessment of Higher Educational Learning Outcomes. Once again, what happened to that project? It was to have included U.S. universities, but it's been put on hold because of resistance, both from the government and from the institutions. So there's all of these attempts that you see. And there's another one, 18 universities and colleges have been at work more recently on what they call VIMS, which is an acronym for the Voluntary Institutional Metrics Project, to provide a college cost by cost comparison, graduation rate comparison, student debt comparison, employment comparison, and what students learned comparison. And guess what happened? After 2 years of setting up VIMS, they managed to track all the things except the data on student learning. That's the only thing that's not being shared. So what does the research show so far? Well, the Spelling Commission, and this is all in this excellent article, which we're going to put the name in the show notes, we always do. Heckinger report really, really produces quality research. And we're going to be actually reading quite a few of the articles in the next 15, 20 weeks. But the Spellings Commission found evidence that the quality of student learning at U.S. colleges and universities is inadequate, and in some cases, it's declining. So 57% of college graduates failed a civic literacy exam. And bar exam pass rates have been going down for 10 straight years. They've been declining. And only 42% of people in an alumni survey that Gallup did strongly agreed that they were challenged academically in college, and only 11% of business leaders said colleges and universities are effectively preparing graduates for the workforce. That's only 1 in 9, 11%. So there's a lot going on with all of this. And the Value Project, which is another acronym standing for Valid Assessment of Learning in Undergraduate Education, they found, mixed reviews in their research. They found that college students nationwide generally did score well in their written communication, but they scored less well when it came to using evidence to support their written arguments. So they could explain it, but they had trouble drawing conclusions. And also, the same thing happened in math. So these are some of the challenges that you're seeing when you attempt to document it. And for those that have tried to prove and verify if learning is occurring, the results have been tepid at best. So this is the question: why has there been so little documentation on what students are actually learning? What do you think, Anika? I mean, the article touched on a few things, the reasons.
Yeah, well, I think it's just been a lack of accountability, I suppose. Is that, I think the article touched on this, is that, they just haven't been held accountable before. Like now, my question to you and to all these other folks is, okay, when are these like post tests being administered? Like at what point, like you said, that, where the kids are, are failing or not meeting the literacy exam, like the civic literacy exam, for example. When is that administered? Like who's doing that?
Well, that's after you're done graduation. But there are 4 or 5 reasons, Anika, why I feel there's been so little verification of whether or not learning is occurring. And this is actually according to the article. So one of the things that the article brought out, and this was Richard Shavelson, who was a former Stanford Graduate School of Education dean who studied the topic in-depthly. He says that colleges' relative resistance to publicizing whether and what their students learn is because it's less important than having a winning football team if you want to stay alive in the scheme of things. So basically what he's saying is it's not really valued by the consumers, really. If the consumers were demanding it, then they wouldn't put the pressure. But the consumers are demanding their football team wins more than they're demanding, let's show documentation that learning is actually occurring. Another reason the article brought out was that popular rankings, which we've talked about and railed against quite a bit before, that attempt to put schools in an ordinal list and say what school's better than another, they have sort of substituted for this in the eyes of the public. And those are based largely on things like grade point averages and SAT scores and low acceptance rates and things like that. So the public sort of feels like, well, I have the rankings to show whether or not you're doing well. And did you move up or did you move down? That's not showing whether there's true engagement, but the public thinks it is, so it hasn't put pressure on institutions. And then a third reason it brought out is that measuring learning in college and reporting the results is really hard to do. So translating this is from the quote from the article, translating those results in a way that lay people can understand is even harder. Obscured as they are often in dense language, acronyms, and footnotes for which higher education is often caricatured. And then the fourth reason the article brought out, and I think this is a really good one, disagreement about what students should learn in college has gotten in the way. Nearly 1 in 5 colleges and universities have no school-wide intended learning outcomes, according to the National Institute of Learning assessment. And really what they're saying here is that it's oftentimes like kind of comparing apples and oranges. So once again, a quote from the article, you have students majoring in everything from philosophy to heating and air conditioning, repair to accounting, even if you had measurable assessments in all those different areas. Adding them up to say students made X amount of progress isn't the same as you saying a 9-year-old, comparing a 9-year-old's reading level to a 10-year-old. In other words, it's really hard to compare such disparate academic disciplines, right? Because they're also different. I do think that's a good point. Like, so for a while at KIPP, Anika, they were talking about basing the pay for teachers on performance, and compensation was going to be based on performance. But the problem is, after years and years and years and years and years, it was extremely hard to come up with something that was seen as an objective metric. You don't want to make it all about test scores. If you rely too much on student feedback, do you remember Larry Hampton?
Oh,
I'm sure you do.
I do. I remember.
So Larry Hampton was this 8th grade science teacher that we had at KIPP, right?
Can I add some context to that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Throw in your context.
Jalen, my oldest child, who is now 22, his science teacher, who it was the best, worst experience Jalen ever had. Let me just say that.
Not surprised. I'm not surprised.
Continue on. Sorry.
All right. So Larry Hampton was this science teacher we had at KIPP who had a PhD, brilliant, wife's brilliant, daughter's brilliant, and he taught at an extremely advanced level, and he graded really difficultly. So he'd oftentimes give 1 or 2 A's for the entire grade, and he would expect students to have an extremely high level of independence. And so there were complaints and complaints and complaints and complaints about him. But I can tell you, when I talked to the students after they went to either high school or college, they said he helped them more than any other teacher.
Oh, yeah.
Consistently. So the point is, if you were basing your performance-based metric off of student or parent surveys, he'd have lost his job. But if you were doing it 3 or 5 years out, he probably got the biggest raise in the school. So that's kind of the point they're making. Like, it's difficult to compare such different disciplines, and that's one of the reasons. But then the article goes on to say, but letting colleges say the public should just trust them. Now, this is you, right? But letting colleges say the public should just trust them to make sure their students learn the right things lets them off the hook. Shavison, the dean of Stanford, says. They say, talking about schools, what we do is just too complicated, and the kinds of outcomes we produce in higher education may take years to understand. That's basically their attitude. Their attitude is, don't mess with something that's too hard to know. And so I think this is great that people are grappling with this. And I think the public really does need to know, like, how do we actually know learning's occurring and what metrics are being used? And so I think just because it's complicated is not an excuse for not an attempt to do it. And the last thing that I'll say is that organization, NILOA, N-I-L-O-A, has devised a degree qualifications profile outlining what students should know at any degree level in any major. And this is something that has quite a bit of funding behind it, including the Bill and Melinda Gates, Lumina Foundation putting some money behind it. And while it may not be perfect, I think it's an important venture to pursue. What do you think, Nika? I'm tired of talking.
Don't be, because I'm seriously in that space. Like I honestly am in that space where I've got to trust some people at some point. Now, I don't want Jalen to be an anesthesiologist that doesn't know how to stick people. Like, I don't want him to be that person, right? But at the same time, he's going to get graduate degree. He's got to go. He's going to further his education. Like, this isn't like once he graduates May 19th, that, he's got some other stuff to do, is my point.
Right.
So I've got to, let me tell you how many battles I've got right now, Mark, with a 10-year-old and 17-year-old and Jalen. I got a lot of stuff to worry about. So
I know. I know.
Like, I just can't. I cannot.
So here's where we disagree. I mean, here's where we agree. When you put your deposit down and you enroll in the school, you are trusting them, right? And at some point, you need to trust somebody. I'm not saying don't trust anybody and don't attempt to go to college. And nor am I saying be a helicopter parent and micromanage every single thing your teachers and professors do. You'll drive them crazy. Like, I get that part of giving them their space, and I get the part that you're doing your research on the front end to evaluate who you're going to trust, and you're voting with your checkbook and trusting your kid's life. But what I'm saying is there still should be some way for you to know that students are learning when you look back at it. Besides, trust us, it's too hard to measure. That's all that I'm saying.
And I totally respect that. And I get that. And I appreciate that, honestly. You know, I just, as a parent, I can't. Like, I cannot right now. And,
well, I know.
You know, hopefully in the end, it's going to, it's going to turn his little self out where it works out for everybody.
Well, you're making a different argument, too. You're like, I only have so much bandwidth.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be a mom. I'm trying to be a wife. I have a demanding job. I've got 3 kids. I don't have the bandwidth to go there. That's a whole different argument, and I understand that. So guess what? We didn't have a knockdown drag out.
Hooray! Because
maybe we will in the chapter title. Chapter.
Or maybe when Jon gets his 12th grade, and I'm filming a lot of stuff.
Yes, I'm sure we will.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Okay, friends, we are transitioning now. This is the part of our podcast that we refer to as our step-by-step walk through the college admission process. For our first-time listeners, I wrote a book called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admission Questions. And in that book, I take one chapter for every question that I get asked a lot, and it results in the 691-page, 171-chapter book. And so we go chapter by chapter through, discuss a couple points out of the book. And the book's divided into 5 sections, and the first section was our first 10 weeks of our podcast, where we looked at how to know what career and major is right for your child. So we covered that in episodes 1 through 10. And then episodes 11 through 28, we looked at how do you build your college list. We had 18 episodes on that. And now we are in section 3 of the book, which deals with how do you get in the schools on your college list. And that is actually chapters 29 all the way through 93. So that means we're in this part of the book and the podcast for 64 weeks or over a year. So we're still a ways to go. We're up to 53, and we're going to be in how do you get in all the way up to chapter 93 or episode 93, because our episode numbers correspond with the book chapter numbers. So this week's chapter / book discussion / walk through the college admission process is asking the question, why are increasing number of colleges not requiring test scores? Anika, you read the chapter. What were some of your main takeaways?
Well, the first part was a no-brainer. Well, I should call it a no-brainer because I've been working with you for so long. But I do agree and know that schools firmly believe that scores are not the end all for every student. And we know that they are highly correlated to family income, meaning that a parent has got $1 billion and they're going to spend $1 billion on test prep. And you've got poor families that don't have any money and can spend any money on test prep, but that does not mean that that poor kid is less smart. Like, we know that. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to stop, Mark, because I read in this part of the chapter where you talked to a test prep company that was charging not $700, but $699
an hour
for test prep. Like, I can't move beyond that. Like, that's ridiculous. Let me tell you, listen, this little $2 I'm paying for Janae's test prep right now hurt me, okay? Like, I was just like, oh, God, I got prom. I got Jalen's about to graduate. Like, John's got to go scout and soccer. Like, all of this stuff is adding up. Like, this $2 I paid for Janae's test prep killed me. So the fact that somebody's paying $699 freaking an hour for test prep is crazy, but I know that's a reality. And I know that's why these kids are banging these test scores out. That's where the rich get richer, because they have the opportunity to get richer. They have the opportunity for access and opportunity and all that stuff. So thankfully, these schools are recognizing this, the ones that are going test optional. And Mark, let me tell you this quick story. So I've joined, we moved to North Carolina recently. We just found an awesome church home. Oh my goodness. There is a family, doctors Howard, both of them are doctors, this retired couple that's in this church, and they're teaching SAT prep classes. And they called me one day, like, hey, don't you want to be a teacher in SAT prep class? I'm like, yeah, that'd be great, whatever. And I had my first workshop session. You'll be so proud of me, Mark. I had my first workshop last week or this past weekend, and I was blown away. I was just blown away about all the stuff that I had no idea that was happening in these tests. So the point that I'm making is that there's a lot of strategy, there's a lot of thought, there's a lot of, oh my God, craziness that goes into the production of these tests and what these kids have to go through. And so that the fact that these schools are recognizing that only the richest, the people that can pay the big bucks can figure this stuff out. And they recognize that as a problem, as a systemic problem, thankfully, and they're addressing that by going test optional. And I don't know. I'm sorry, I digressed a little bit, but it was just, I was blown away by what I learned in that one workshop session that I took in terms of these test prep strategies and what these kids need to know. And I was blown away by what if these kids didn't know this? Like, oh my God, like what if they didn't have the money to learn? Like this family, the Howard family, they're doing this for free in this church, Providence Baptist Church. And I'm so thank God for them, because they're just a phenomenal, this is a phenomenal couple that's doing this. But it's blowing me away about, what the efforts that go into these tests, the production of these tests, like, how they're setting these tests up, and what these poor kids have to go through to figure it out. And in some cases, that's the only way they're getting into these certain universities. But thank God that there's these universities that recognize the game that's being played around these tests. Period. It's alarming. It's disheartening at most. And I'm sorry, did I just ramble on too much? But
yeah. But I just let you do it because you were so excited. I'm just gonna let you ramble. Talk about your Providence Baptist Church and talk about your Dr. Howard and just go at it.
Shout out to the Howards, okay? Because they are off the charts. I love this little couple. But yeah, it's crazy, But let me conclude by saying thank God for these schools that recognize the systemic issues that are surrounding these standardized tests and that they're moving away from it. But let me just stop there.
So let me say, you definitely hit on one of the big reasons why schools are moving away from the test. It's because of they don't like the whole test prep industry, and they don't like the fact that more affluent families have an advantage and a leg up on that component of it. But that's not the only reason. So I wrote down 7 reasons. Ooh. So quickly blow through them. So there's another reason that has to do with not just test prep, but there are so many advantages if your parents are wealthy and educated that go beyond test prep, right? So, for example, in this country, it's the only country I know of, and I believe it's the only country that does this in the Western Hemisphere, where the majority of the funding for schools, public schools, comes from property taxes. So more affluent families already have an advantage of being in better schools just because of that alone, more dollars that go into the school district. Plus, when you're an educated or an affluent parent, there's just a level of exposure that you get and are able to give your child because you're the child's primary teacher. So you travel internationally and your friends are more educated. And so your kids exposed to certain types of vocabulary and certain conversations and everything from seeing you reading to museums and peer discussions and all of that. So, it creates a gap. And so what these schools are saying is talent does not reside only in one zip code. And we've talked about the study quite a few times before, where 38 of the most prestigious private schools in the country have more students from the top 1% socioeconomically, incomes of over $630,000, than they do from the bottom 60%, incomes under $65,000. Right? And that's something schools push back on. So yeah, there's the test prep gap, but there's also just the overall, all the advantages that come with more affluence and more education on the part of parents. Thirdly, schools understand the value of diversity and how it enhances the quality of their education. And that's all types of diversity. socioeconomic, racial, ethnic, geographic, all of that. And so they know they can be more diverse, therefore improve the quality of their education that they offer if they don't focus as much on the test. Fourth, there's research now. Bowdoin has gone test optional for 50 years, 1969. This is one of the most selective schools in the country. And they consistently are able to admit students who do well. Bates has been test optional for 35 years, and there was a major research study Bates did after their 20-year anniversary of going test optional, showing that students that they admit through test optional means graduate at the same rates and have similar GPAs within like 1/100th of a point on the GPA. So the point is there's now lots and lots of research and lots of schools. Do you remember the story I shared in the book from Wake Forest, Anika?
Mm-hmm. Where they've been test optional.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they're doing research, and their test optional students are graduating the same rate and similar GPAs.
Right.
So schools that have gone test optional have realized, hey, we can make decisions without the scores and make good decisions. So there's the research piece. Then you've got the relentless pursuit of some key leaders like Bob Schaefer and Lloyd Thacker that have been out really pounding the pavement, pounding the pulpit on this issue, and been doing so for decades now. And they're making a lot of inroads. So you've got a lot of strong leadership by organizations like Fair Test. Then there's another one, and this is kind of an important one. So let's not omit this and make it sound like everything is completely copacetic and puritanical, because it's not. So there's a more sinister motive for some. When schools go test optional, they don't say you cannot submit scores. They say you don't have to submit scores. Sarah Lawrence was the only school that I know of that was saying do not send scores. We're not looking at them. And even they have retracted that. So what does that mean? It means that if they're still going to consider scores if you submit them, do you think the people that are going to submit scores are going to be high testers or low testers? If it's a test optional school, but we'll look at scores.
I'll say high.
Of course. So what it does, so here's the more sinister motive. The more sinister motive is your test score averages are going to go up because the only people that are going to submit them are high. Your applications are going to go up because a lot of people are going to like the fact that you're test optional. So now your acceptance rate's going to go down. You're going to move higher up the rankings. Your prestige is going to go up. And so it's a lot of people think the more sinister motive is you just want to increase your scarcity, increase your selectivity, increase your prestige, climb up in the rankings because you know you'll get more applications, and you know your test score averages are actually going to go up because the only people who are going to send them in are going to be the ones that do well.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question that schools do this knowing this, but from my experience, most of the times when schools do it, they do it for proper motives, but they are mindful of the fact that, by the way, this can actually help us as well.
Mm-hmm.
So those are my thoughts. And I can tell you, Nick, I've had many conversations with schools that have not gone test optional from some selective schools, and they are seriously considering it. And I can tell you, we talked about the Harvard case in episodes 43 through 45. If Harvard loses their case, anti-affirmative action case being brought by a conservative group against Harvard, I can tell you within 18 months, there'll be a lot of schools that will go test optional because schools believe at their core that a more diverse applicant pool strengthens the quality of the educational experience for people in their student body. So what do you think? What do you think about some of the other reasons I shared? Anything jump off at you?
Well, I think we should mark this day 5 years from now and see. Let's just see what's popping off.
Yeah.
Because it only makes sense, right? But yeah, well, let's see. Let's just see. That's all I got to say.
Now, in the chapter, I'm a supporter of the test optional movement, but I'm not critical of schools that don't go test optional.
Right.
You are giving up some valuable information. There's a quote in the book from former dean of admission at Brown. I won't read the quote, but basically it says that the test is helpful to us at extremes. It's not very helpful at all in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you see in a sea of A's, and one student has a 920 on their SAT and another student has a 35 ACT or a 1550, that tells you something, right? So I understand why some schools are reluctant to give it up, because scores plus grades plus recs plus all the other metrics they use help you make better academic decisions. But I'm still supportive of it because schools can make good decisions without the test scores. It just takes a little bit more work.
So, Mark, so the big takeaway for parents that whose students don't test well, like there are students we know that just don't test well, is the strategy that we just look up. Now, I know the test optional movement has this, it's just a massive list of schools. Like, here are all these schools that are test optional. Do we start with that list and we work our way through that list, or what is the approach for those parents, for us parents?
A great question, because I encounter that a lot, right? And so if someone is testing abysmally, I will present them with an option of, do you want me to build your list of schools exclusively off of test optional schools? And we go over the schools, what they would be, and it's case by case. Some people are like, yeah, let's do it. Then sometimes people are like, no, I kind of don't want to rule out these schools over here that are not test optional. So then we devise a test prep strategy, but I will make sure that there are lots of test optional schools on their list, just in case their test scores don't come up that much. Because we've talked about this before. It's hard to cram for this test and experience exponential increases. The way you prepare for the test is by preparing your whole life. Mm-hmm. So did I answer your question, Anika? So it's kind of an either or. Like sometimes the best approach is exclusively to use test optional schools. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's no, we're going to do some serious test prep, but we're still going to put some test optional schools on your list, but we won't exclusively do it.
Yeah, you did. And is it the test optional movement? Is that the formal name of the schools that are doing the test optional?
Well, no, the movement is just the people, like Schaefer's and the Lloyd Thackers and organizations out there like Fair Test and Jack Kent Cook and others that are really promoting the decreased use of testing or the lack of irresponsible use of testing. That's the movement. The movement is growing. It's just an individual decision whether a school goes test optional or not. Now, let me say this. There are a lot of great schools that are not test optional, but they don't necessarily put substantial emphasis on the test. And I think those schools should be commended as well.
Call Mark. There's the answer. I'm just being honest.
You're being kind.
Honesty is the best policy. I'm telling you.
What did you eat tonight?
I'm just saying.
Let's transition to our question.
No.
No?
Because let me tell you where, you know what, maybe we should, but I'm going to go ahead and share this anyway. Mark, I just imagine the Madden family, had we not intersected, number one, with the KIP program, where Mark just so happened to be hired. And it's just crazy. Like, I just can't imagine where we would be without your guidance. I'm just being honest. Like, I just... Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm sorry.
So let me say this, because I hear this from families a lot, and I appreciate the kindness, and I know it's genuine. But let me tell you how I see it. This is the same thing I tell my families when they say that to me. And you'll relate to this because Janae is a track runner. Mm-hmm. I think of the whole process like a relay. So anyone who knows track knows there's 4 legs to a relay, right? So it starts out with the parents, the atmosphere that you create in your home, the emphasis that you put on education, seeing you read, seeing you hold your child accountable, doing everything you can, working with them with their homework, exposing them. So it starts with the parents, first leg. Then quality administration in quality schools for like 14 years. Yeah. Like, that's priceless. So then you have the teachers, the administration for 14 years. Okay. And then, I'll say I'm the third leg. I come in here and, help you build your college list and give you some guidance and help you with your essays and some strategy. But then the last list is the student, because you can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
That's right.
So ultimately, the student has to apply everything themselves. And then I say, sprinkled over top of everything is the sovereignty of God. So that's my view of everything. So I get a little uncomfortable when people give me too much credit because I think I see it as a partnership between the parents, the administration, the teachers, myself, and the student and God. And that's my belief.
I'll go with that. Amen, Mark. I'll go with that.
It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Mark, our question, and can I give a disclaimer, is from a great, awesome woman named Amanita. She's in Raleigh, North Carolina, because I know her, and she's awesome, and her daughter is awesome, and she's just in a really good place with her college placement. But her question for the week is, how does she know that her child can know that the major she selects is going to lead to a job that she will love and be good at? And I feel like I can answer some of this, but you're the expert, Mark, so I'm going to let you lead. Go ahead.
All right. So I'm not trying to be negative, Ned, but there are three things in that question. One is know that you'll get a job. Two is know you will love it. Three is know you will be good at it. And I do feel I need to start out by saying there are no guarantees in life. So the definitiveness of the word no, I feel I have to push back on it just a little bit. I kind of liken it to the stock market. So if you invest in a broad, diverse swath of ETFs, mutual funds with some fixed assets like REITs and commodities and bonds, chances are you're going to make money over time. I mean, the market has returned a little more than 10% since 1926. Okay. And treasury bills, T-bills, which are seen as virtually almost no risk, they have returned 3%. So there's a 7% difference between overall what the U.S. stocks have returned compared to T-bills. So you're like, where's he going with this? Just listen to me. I'll bring it around. So the chances are if you do the right thing, invest, you make more money in the U.S. stock market than T-bills. However, there have actually been 3 different consecutive periods of at least 13 years where you would have made more money with T-bills than with stocks from 1926 to 1943, which is 15 years. I'm sorry, 1929 to 1943, which is 15 years. 1969 to 1982, 14 years, or from 2000 to 2012, because you got the dot-com crash in the 99, 2000, and then you got the global recession in 2008 and 9. So all 3 of those 13-year time periods, T-bills outperformed the market. And so we can talk about things that increase your probability of getting a job, getting something you love, and getting something you're good at. But I just feel I need to push back a little bit on the word no, like 100%. And I just had to do that. So that's the first thing. Any thoughts on that? Okay. All right. So let's break it down. I want to break it down into 3 parts. The first part, get a job. Second part, love it. Third part, do something you're good at. Let's talk about get a job. First, select a college that has great career placement, right? Make sure you really check out the career placement because that is very important in you getting a job. Utilize the resources that they have there. Mm-hmm. Do well in school. I was just talking with several students that were interviewing for jobs, and schools are looking for kids. This is true for certain majors with certain GPAs. So they're. I was at Morehouse College, Anika, and I was talking to them about their business department and some of the companies that come in and recruit there for consulting and for banking and, the Goldman Sachs and all those companies. And hey, they only look at students with a certain GPA. So do well in school. Mm-hmm. Okay. Pick a school with a good reputation in your major and do something that you're good at, and then network. Any thoughts on that? Those are some thoughts on getting a job.
I'm all about the network because...
So you're not about to do well in school?
Well, I'm about to... That's number 1.
I couldn't resist that.
1.5 is the network. Because I'll tell you, because I know we've talked about this before too, right? Is the career placement. Like, that career placement office at your school is critical. Like, you have really got to become best friends with those folks. And I'm still, like, wrestling with Jay about, like, you really got to work in partnership with this office to get what you need. Like, period. Like, I don't.
Well,
Period.
and there's a correlation between the career between the career services and networking, right? Because
Right. Exactly.
because a lot of times that's where you're getting your internships and going to your job fairs and everything. So the correlation between career placement and networking. Now, I don't believe you should only network there. Tap into everybody that you know, but
Right.
but still, there's definitely a correlation. So I'll say those are some things on getting a job. Now, in terms of doing what you love, ask yourself this: what do you do in your free time? What do you do when it doesn't feel like work to you at all? What is it that you like to read? What TV shows do you like to watch? And intern and shadow and make sure that the job description is actually what you think it will be like, and do interest inventory tests. Now, I have a couple quick stories on this. One is, I don't think I've shared this on the podcast before. If I do, cut me off right away, because I'd shared this with somebody recently, but I think it was a client. So after I graduated from Michigan State, I was thinking about doing a master's in labor industrial relations and going into arbitration and, and helping, companies negotiate. And so because Michigan State had a really strong master's in labor industrial relations, only 1 year. So I decided to do an internship. And can I tell you, Anika, that internship was like watching paint dry to me. So I had to it's like back then it was like all paper. It's like these big encyclopedias, wall to wall to wall. It's like in a law office, right? And I had to go research all of these cases for the arbitrator to go and present. And it was like snoozeaholic to me. I mean, I was just, I was dying in there. And so the point is, even that I was all excited about this, when I actually started doing the work, it was not what I thought it was going to be. So I went in a different direction. And that's why last week we talked about co-ops, why I like co-op programs so much. And then that's story number one. Story number two, I've never did something I know I haven't told you. So one of the things Joy wants to do, for our first-time listeners, Joy's my 20-year-old daughter. I have a 22-year-old daughter and a 20-year-old daughter. Joy wants to be a realtor. Now, I'm watching and I'm observing, okay? Because remember, we're talking about do what you love. And I actually think she would be a fantastic realtor. First of all, any inventory test she's ever taken shows that she's really good at sales. But here's the thing. If I ever want to have time with my daughter, all I have to do is look up a place that's having an open house, and I'll say, hey, Joey, you want to go look at houses? And she's all in. And then there's this TV network. Is it called HGD TV or something? HDT? It's all
GTV, I'm sure.
Something like that. All they do is have little shows on about little tiny homes, or sell this home, or fix her up for this, something like that. And she loves to watch this. So I am seeing her, she'll scour through looking up homes online all the time on Zillow and Georgia MLS and all this stuff. And so I see the love for it there, right? So, I mean, right now this would be her side gig in addition to school counseling. But the point is, when you really love something, it should be fun and should be rewarding. What are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking about my absolute favorite resource that I talked about quite a few episodes ago.
I think I know where you're going.
You want to take a guess?
Are you talking about the Occupational Outlook Handbook?
Oh my God.
I feel like when I introduced you to that, it was like someone in the 80s introducing someone to crack.
Well, call me a crack addict because
this is how rumors get started. That's how rumors get started.
I'll go with this one because that Occupational Outlook Handbook. Let me tell you something. I tell so many people about that thing like nonstop.
It really is good.
I'm really like, y'all have got to go to this Occupational Outlook Handbook. And the level of detail that this guide goes through online to tell you everything that you need to know, everything you need to feel, everything you need to anticipate about a certain occupation is off the charts. So that is like my go-to. And it's funny because I've been to it like 1,000 times for Janae, and I'm going to go back to it again to make her reference. As we're going through this, she wants to be a veterinarian. So I'm just like reminding her, okay, remember this. And I keep taking her back to that. because it's a phenomenal, I mean, seriously, it's a phenomenal resource to let you know everything that you need to know and be prepared for to take on any and every occupation. So to like minimize that little source, it would be foolish of you because it's phenomenal. And I mean, and I just feel like it's a leading resource in helping our kids understand what may or may not be involved with any profession. Just go there, study it up and down, not a one-stop shop. Keep going back to it. Take your kids back to it, reference it for yourself, for everything that your kid needs to go through to understand that this is what you're getting yourself into for this particular major. So serious. It's awesome.
It is a great resource. It's a government resource. It's produced by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, so there's a lot of money behind it, and it's updated pretty constantly.
Evidently,
and so,
yes.
And so the last thing is, what are you good at? And so with that, constantly ask for feedback. Ask for feedback from your teachers, from your friends, from your parents.
Yes.
You know, they will affirm, self-assess, do interest inventories. They will affirm. If you're really listening, the people around you will affirm, look, these are your gifts and these are where they're not. Obviously, we know singing is not mine, right? So there was no music career in the making for me.
Correct.
Only our longtime listeners will get that one.
Correct.
Only our longtime listeners will get that one. Oh, that's funny. By the way, I have a new nickname for you. I'm going to start calling you Mika, not Anika. I was talking to one of our listeners, and he really likes our show, and he's like, "You're like Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski on Morning Joe." Oh, it's a political show.
No idea.
It's a political show. You have to watch it to get it. But so I'll have to call you Mika. But
I'll take it. Whatever.
Okay, friends, if you heard our first part of my interview with Elaine Griffin Rubin, talking about the 9 different options for repaying your student loans. This is very important information. And if you don't have any student loans, it's important information for others around you, because I can assure you, coworkers, friends, family, people that you know will. And of all the interviews I've ever done, this is the most technical one. So I know there's a lot of information. But I think you're going to really like part 2, because in part 2, we talk about a lot of things like, what do you do if you're having trouble paying your student loan? And we talk about what are the income-driven repayment plans. And we talk about what are some of the advantages of federal loans compared to private loans. And we talk about 2 different versions of income-based repayment plans. And we talk about what is the income-contingent repayment plan and who is it good for. And we talk about other things like the pay-as-you-earn repayment option and revised pay-as-you-earn and what loans qualify for interest subsidies. And other things, too. We touch on public service loan forgiveness. And we talk about tax filing status and how it impacts what you're being asked to pay. So it's a lot of information, but listen, take notes, and tell a friend, especially if they owe a lot of money from their student loans.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
So let's transition to income-driven payments. You've already teased our listeners a few times by throwing that out there. So, and I know this is pretty complex. So why don't you take some time to explain what income-driven repayment plans are and what are some factors that people need to be aware about with these plans?
Yeah. So these plans, I feel like there are a lot of words to explain them, even to read or write down. It's got a lot of terms in there. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to kind of intro them a little bit. And then I'm sure we're going to dive right into each one to see how each of them works. So income-driven repayment plans are plans where your monthly payments are based on your income. Now, this is a pretty unique way to repay debt. Not a lot of I can't think of any other type of debts allow you to repay based solely on your income versus on how much you actually owe them. So it's a very unique plan. It's a unique feature. So essentially, you could have a loan balance of $10,000 or a loan balance of $50,000, and your repayment amount will be the same, because they're really looking at your income and they're not looking at how much you owe in student loans. So because your income is considered, these plans do require a little bit more work on the borrower side, because if you're in a standard plan, you sign up and you make your payments, and as long as you're making them on time, you're just, life is good and you don't really have to do much else. Just make sure those payments are getting to that servicer on time. With these types of loans, you sign up, you have to prove your income. You have to show your income and your household size. Sometimes you can easily do that by using the IRS data retrieval tool that's made available. You might have used that to complete the FAFSA. So you can use that to help your servicer make sure that your payment amount is set. And you have to do that every year. So your payment amount can change every year and go up and down no matter what's going on, depending on what's going on in your work life and how much income you're earning, and if you get married and other factors like that. So overall, that's how those income-driven repayment plans work. And they tend to be a great option for borrowers who have relatively high student loan debt when compared to their income, and for borrowers who are really looking to be able to benefit from the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, the PSLF program we touched on before. So those are the two types of borrowers that this plan is really aimed for. And also, we talked about it with the extended repayment plan. If you're looking at an extended repayment plan, I would highly suggest looking into one of these income-driven repayment plans as well, because there's some great features with them that we'll touch on with each type that there is.
Yeah, and this is something that's really unique to the federal student loans. Sometimes, Elaine, I'm having a conversation with one of these private lenders, and they're trying to make the case how great their products are, and I tend to be very skeptical about private loans, but they feel like they've gotten better over the years. And so, in the past they used to all be variable, and I'm like, no, they're fixed. We offer fixed, some of them say, and then some of them will talk about if your credit's really good, we may even be able to beat the rate, not of the federal direct student loan, but maybe the Parent Plus loan, they say. And they say we don't have origination fees. But one thing, and some of them now even say, we can do some form of forbearance, But one thing they all say is we cannot touch this income-driven stuff that the federal government offers. That's one thing, we just can't even go near that. Is that your experience as well? Because that's been the experience I've had with every one of those private lenders I've ever had conversations with.
I would say in some ways, yes, it's tough for a private lender to match this type of repayment because it really doesn't, kind of give them a deadline or an understanding of when that debt will be repaid. And that could also come with some other issues. Yeah, so it has been my experience to see that the private student loan options out there aren't able to offer the variety of repayment plans that the federal student loans offer. The thing about the private student loans, however, it is for a different type of borrower. It's not going to be the same borrower. It's not necessarily going to be the same borrower as some of the federal student loan borrowers. For one thing, generally most students, especially undergraduate students, can't qualify because they don't have much of a credit history or work history to get a private student loan without a cosigner. And we touched a little bit on that before in the episodes that I was in before. But the whole thing with that is that type of borrower maybe doesn't need as much access to flexible repayment terms because they've already deemed to be in a financial place where they can meet the repayment obligations of a private student loan, which may not be as varied as some of these federal student loan options. But in some ways, that's why that federal student loan option is so appealing, because you have the ability to repay with some of these income-driven plans, maybe do an extended plan, and maybe even look for a forgiveness type of option. So generally, that's why those private student loans may not have that. And also, you got to keep in mind with these income-driven plans, there are terms set, and we'll get into that as we go through them. But generally, once you hit that term, and if there's a loan balance still left over, some of that will be forgiven on the federal side. Private student loans sometimes can't offer that because there's no guarantee on how much they're going to get paid back of the amount they were able to lend. And, they're not guaranteed by the federal government like these federal student loans are, which do offer those types of benefits.
I love it. I love it. So, Elaine, let's talk about one that I think some people may have heard of. sometimes called IBR, which is just an acronym for income-based repayment, right? Talk to us about the IBR/income-based repayment, how it works and who it may be good for.
All right, so I'm going to ask everyone to bear with me a little bit, because to go through the first income-driven repayment plan and explaining the income-based repayment plan, it's just a type of it, starts to bring up some more of those words and definitions that we should work through. So when listeners out there are going through their own situation and filling out the applications and such, you'll see some of those words on there, and now you'll have a little bit of an idea of what they mean. So bear with me as we dive into the income-based repayment plan. It is probably the most well-known of the plans, even though it's not the oldest of the plans, actually. But this plan showed up around 2009. And it can be used to pay back direct loans and loans from the older loan program, the Federal Family Education Loan Program, or also known as FEL loans. So sometimes you'll see it as FFEL loans on your statements and such. However, there is a restriction on Parent Plus loans when it comes to repayment for the income-based repayment plan. So, not to make things even more complicated or anything, but there are two versions of the income-based repayment plan.
Of course. Why not have 20? Why not 3 or 4? They're just trying to make. You almost need a PhD in finance to understand this stuff, right?
Yeah. So why don't we go through the original IBR plan, and then we can touch on the new IBR plan. I can tell you the differences between the two, because essentially you just need to know how these plans are outlined, and then I can tell you the differences of the new IBR plan. And a quick note about the new IBR plan. One of the reasons why there's two versions, because they changed some of the repayment terms for new borrowers as of July 1st, 2014. So you do have to be eligible to qualify to repay under the new IBR plan in order to utilize it. But if not, then you could use the original or old IBR plan. So this is how this plan works. You do need to qualify for this plan. You need to be deemed to have a partial financial hardship. And I'll ask the question for everyone out there. What does that mean?
Got that right.
So that means that your 10-year standard repayment amount, the amount we discussed before, is more than 15% of your discretionary income. I'll ask the next question. What is my discretionary income? Essentially, that's going to be the difference between your income and 150% of the federal poverty guideline for your household size. So that's a lot of words, but essentially, if your standard 10-year repayment amount is more than 15% of your discretionary income, when all that math is done, then you're deemed to have a partial financial hardship. And if you are going to repay under this plan, your repayment amount will either be 15% of your discretionary income, that calculation that we did there before, but it will never be more than your 10-year standard repayment amount. If you aren't deemed to have a partial financial hardship, meaning your 10-year standard repayment amount is less than 15% of your discretionary income, then you aren't eligible to repay under this plan, but why would you? That's essentially saying 15% of your discretionary income is more than your 10-year standard repayment amount. So you'd be paying more each month and you'd be repaying faster than 10 years. So there is no financial benefit really for you. If they would allow you to use this plan, you'd be repaying faster than your 10-year plan anyways. But that's what you need to do to qualify. And then that's what your payment will be if you are eligible to use this plan. There is no minimum payment on this, so you can go down to zero. Yes, zero. But how would you ever pay off your loan, Elaine? Well, this is one of the benefits of these income-driven plans, is after you've made 25 years of your payment, whatever amount that is, the remaining loan balance will be forgiven. So that's a great benefit to this type of plan, especially if you are on the lower end of the income side and you don't want to be stuck in repayment indefinitely and have that loan balance get bigger and bigger every year, especially if you're not paying off your interest every month. There's another helpful benefit with this plan. If you are not paying the amount of interest that's accruing every month, because we know every month is interest will be your cost of borrowing that money, and every month there's a total amount of interest that's added up on your loan. If your monthly payment does not cover that, there is an interest subsidy benefit or a way that some of that interest is covered, so it's not going to be added or kept there as something you owe money on. There's an interest subsidy of 100% for 3 years of your subsidized loans. So that is helpful, especially in those periods where maybe you have that lower payment, maybe a zero payment, and that interest just keeps accruing and accruing. And eventually you either have to pay for it over time to get it repaid, or you will have some of that forgiven.
Yeah, and listeners, I know we're really getting technical, but this is so important because if you're one of these borrowers, or if you know somebody, and chances are you definitely know somebody who has a large loan balance and modest income, then you really need to know about these options, because you'll drown if you're sitting there looking at, a $1,200 or $1,400 a month payment, and you're making $30,000 or $40,000. You just can't do it, and that's where these protections are in place, because there still is a plan out there for you. And I heard this just last week, Elaine, in some new figures that came out. 31% of Black students that graduate that take out loans have a $100,000 loan balance. In a new report, I forget the name of it, but it was one. It's an official report that that study that comes out every 4 years. That's what that. I don't know if you saw that, but I was staggeringly high, and that's a lot of money. It's going to be a big balance, and it's not just Black students, but that's a lot of. If you have a lot of loans and low income, then these are great options. Would you agree?
I completely agree. And I did see that report come out, and it was quite eye-opening to see the differences and the different types of people who have high loan debts. And also that study, I believe, also breaks down into what sort of chances there's successful repayment rates as well. So it is eye-opening, but these programs can really start to help people get them on track to get into repayment and kind of make an overwhelming situation a little more manageable for them. And the one thing I didn't want to forget to touch on is I told you I was going to tell you the difference for the new IBR. So that's for the new borrowers as of July 1st, 2014. If they're eligible to repay under that new IBR plan, it's essentially the same. You have to qualify. You need to have a partial financial hardship, but some of the percentages and the numbers are a little different. So to determine if you have a partial financial hardship and what your payment will be, because I try to show that your partial financial hardship calculation is also your payment, that's going to be 10% of your discretionary income. So that's obviously less than the 15% of your discretionary income from before. And that borrower is eligible for forgiveness after 20 years of payments instead of the 25 years. So if you're eligible for that, obviously a more, appealing way to repay your loans. But the one thing I would note here, married couples out there, if you are planning to use one of these plans and you file a joint tax return, keep in mind that your combined income, but also your combined debt, is taken into consideration when you figure out how much you're going to be paying on your loan.
Thank you for that.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, in our In the News section today, we discussed an article, As Students Return to College, a Basic Question Persists. What are they learning? And that article comes from the Hechinger Report. And our recommended resource for episode 53 is the Hechinger Report. Now, the Hechinger Report that covers inequality and innovation in education with in-depth journalism that uses research, data, and stories from the classroom and campuses to show the public how education can be improved and why it matters. And they've got extremely talented staff of about 18 writers. Our article today was by Jon Marcus, and we're going to be featuring the Hechinger Report quite a bit in the future. We're going to discuss some fantastic articles that they have written in episodes 61, 64, and 66. But they've received numerous education awards and been featured on places like The Nation, Time, The Atlantic, Slate, USA Today, NBC, McClatchy, Washington Post, to name a few organizations. The Hechinger Report gets its name from Fred Hechinger, who was the education editor of New York Times, and author of several books, and a strong advocate for public education. And so if you want high-quality journalism with data and research and creativity that will challenge you to really move the bar forward when it comes to innovation and inequality in education, I can't recommend the Hechinger newsletter enough. And you can just go to thehechingerreport.org and sign up for their free newsletter. Now let me spell Hechinger for you. It's HECHINGER and then report.org. I now resume my interview. Now let's talk about another plan that sounds the same, because you say income-based. This one's called income contingent plan, the income contingent, but it does have some differences, including there's even the potential for Parent Plus loans to be flipped into ICR, income contingent repayment options, right? So talk about some of the differences between the ICR, income contingent plan, and the IBR.
All right. So this is one of the older plans. It's a little less known, even though it's definitely been out there for a while. So the income contingent plan, and I'm so glad we were able to go through some of those definitions and determining discretionary income and that sort of thing, because we're going to use those terms a lot from this point forward. So if you missed that, or you get a little confused about what I'm talking about, maybe rewind to the IBR question and get some of those definitions settled there for you. And keep in mind, a lot of words I'm throwing out to you, but there are a lot of calculators online that can help you, where you can type in your information, or better yet, if you log into studentaid.gov's My Federal Aid, you can log in with your FSA ID. It's right on studentaid.gov website on the top corner. You can use the repayment estimator, but if you're logging in, it will actually populate your loans through the National Student Loan Database in there, and it'll give you some pretty exact estimates of what you're looking at before you make that call to that servicer to see what you want to do. So a lot of words, a lot of explanation to understand how the plans work, but there are some simple ways to see what the number results are for you. So you don't have to memorize all these terms, but it's good to know that they're out there, because you'll see them on the applications for sure. So this income contingent repayment plan. Now, this one's only available for direct loan borrowers, except for Parent Plus loan borrowers. But this one has a little bit of a loophole to be able to repay a Parent Plus loan. So what you would have to do, Parent Plus loan borrowers, if you want to get into one of these income-driven plans, because this is the only one with this loophole, is you would have to consolidate your loan into a direct consolidation loan, and then repay that direct consolidation loan with the income contingent plan. The other plans will actually restrict the repayment of a direct consolidation loan, which includes a Parent Plus loan, which is one of those loans that would have been paid off to create the direct consolidation loan. So Parent Plus borrowers, this is your way to use an income plan if that is something you're looking for or need or want to qualify for PSLF. So the difference with this plan is you don't actually need to qualify. We touched on this a little bit on the IBR explanation, but if you don't need to qualify, there's a little bit of a risk here, I guess, so to speak. So this plan works by your monthly payment will be determined by either it being your 20% of your discretionary income or a payment under a 12-year fixed term. So this one works a little bit differently. If you're on the 20% discretionary income plan, it doesn't just kind of switch like the IBR will, where if you hit If you no longer have a partial financial hardship, it'll go to the 10-year plan. This plan doesn't work like that. This plan essentially has no cap on how high your payments can go. So if you get that great job, you get a huge raise, and you're in this plan, your payment will adjust accordingly to 20% of your discretionary income. Meaning you can pay this off faster than 10 years if you have an income to kind of match that. So that's just something to keep in mind there on how that works. After 25 years of payments made under this plan, then you're eligible for forgiveness if there's anything to forgive there. And this one does not have any interest subsidy or any sort of help with that if your payments aren't meeting the amount of your monthly accrued interest. So this is definitely an option out there. It's generally used to help people with Parent Plus loans maybe try to qualify towards like a public service loan forgiveness, or if they really need help with their payments and they do need to have a plan that bases their payments on their income. So it's an option out there.
Thank you. So before we transition to another income-driven plan, we're going to talk about the pay-as-you-earn repayment plan. One thing that dawns on me, Elaine, is that some people may be feeling like it'd be helpful if I could read something. Like, this is really helpful. I'm listening. It's whetting my appetite. But I feel like I need to see it either on a computer screen or in print form or something. So where would you recommend our listeners go if they want to kind of read about this stuff in addition to hear about it?
So our site, Edvisors.com, provides information on repayment. It provides information on each one of these plans, breaks them down for you in words so it's easier to see and understand. And just from this conversation, like, don't be surprised if we start to have some blogs about some of these topics and maybe devoting whole blogs to whole repayment plans. So stay tuned. Maybe some of that stuff will come as well. But the other site, you could use Edvisors.com. Great resource out there. We really try to put the best information and easy to understand information out there. I also mentioned another great resource is maybe going directly to the source of studentaid.gov and logging in and maybe using that repayment estimator and seeing what all these words mean and get those numbers. Because sometimes it's easier to make decisions based on those numbers, with the assumption, you are doing some of your due diligence and your research there to know what your decision means. And then they have some resources as well. And then the other resource you have is call your loan servicer. Talk to them about what is going on and have them explain the terms and what it means for you to be in those plans. They're all ready to do that. I know that they are. They should be able to help you through your situation and kind of see what you're eligible for. Like I said, some of these things that we've gone through are for new borrowers or restricted to only direct loan borrowers, and you don't know what you are. That's not that uncommon. So don't think you're the only one who's confused for what you're eligible for. Your loan servicer can help you walk through that. And it's completely free to call them. Always free places you can go for advice to work with your federal student loans.
So that was great, listeners. I hope you heard that. Elaine actually gave us 4 resources there. There's the Edvisors.com website, where she's a senior contributor with fantastic information. 500,000 people get their newsletter, and they've been featured on many, many, many prominent news sources. You can go right to studentaid.gov. You can also punch numbers into the calculators to see what your repayment options would be like under these different plans, and you can call your loan servicer. So we don't want you to be overwhelmed by all this information. And you can go back in and replay it. So there's 5 things. Replay the episode again.
Next week in the news, the higher education divide. The haves keep getting richer. Other schools, not so much. And we'll be in chapter 54 of 171 answers. And what are the different variations of test optional and text flexible colleges? Next week's question asks, what is satisfactory academic progress and why is it important? And Mark concludes his interview with Elaine Griffin Rubin in the final part of 9 different federal loan repayment options. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you found this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that could really use this information. Your College Bound Kid is produced by John Lockenbaugh. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo, and marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. If you want to get a copy of the book 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on the show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions with an S at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.